Good evening and welcome to This Week in Northern California. I'm Belva Davis. Joining me on tonight on the news panel are John Fensterwald, journalist with the Silicon Valley Education Foundation on California's failed bid for Race to the Top funding for public schools. Carla Marinucci, political reporter for the San Francisco Chronicle on the fast approaching general elections. And we began with Sarah Varney, health reporter for KQED Public Radio on health care reform bills in California. Sarah explained the legislature took action and it has to do with national health care. So what did the legislature decide this week?
California this week became the first state to pass legislation setting up what's known as the health insurance exchange. So this is the marketplace or the health insurance superstore where individuals and small businesses will eventually be able to go and compare and shop for health plans. And
that it is still a couple of years away. Did it get through the legislature smoothly enough that the governor might sign the bills?
Well, he's not signaled yet one way or the other whether or not he's going to sign them, but he has pledged that he wants to have exchange legislation signed by the time he leaves office. So if he doesn't sign this legislation, which I think would be I would suspect that he would actually sign it since his people were in on the negotiations, but he would only have then the fall to actually get legislation again through.
And Sarah, talk about, who gets the health care first? Who are the first consumers out there who are going to feel the effects of this legislation? And I'm also wondering, California is such a huge market. How does this affect the Obama agenda in the rest of the country once we sign on to this?
Well, there's some 4 million people who would be eligible for the exchange in the first year. And you're right, it wouldn't be up and running until 2014. And that's what has been mandated under the federal health reform law. So the federal health reform law basically gives wide latitude to the states to implement this element of health reform. And this is really kind of the backbone. This is the marketplace where people will go and shop for these plans. So it'll be individuals who are now either insured through individual plans that they purchase, or perhaps they're uninsured. These will be small businesses that are having a very difficult time buying insurance right now. You'll be able to go onto essentially what is a website, and you'll be able to, according to the way the legislation is written, what California is going to do is actually really ensure that the products that you're comparing are actually essentially identical. So the federal legislation sets up some broad categories with minimum benefits and establishes standards for cost sharing. But even within those broad standards, there's a lot of ways in which the insurance companies can, they would say, differentiate their products. We as consumers might say, confuse us. So the California legislation is actually quite aggressive. It says to the board that is going to oversee this new independent state agency, you have really broad powers to essentially write the rules here, and you can decide who can play in this marketplace and who can't. So, and they'll say this particular product we don't think is up to snuff. We don't think it's high enough quality. So one way to think about it is, we at KQED or the Chronicle, other places who or essentially have a large employer who's sort of looking out for us. We have an HR department. They might hire an insurance broker who's going out and shopping for different plans, vetting them, bringing them back and saying, here's your 5 options, or here's your 2 options, or your 10 options, depending on the size of your company. But you'll know that those plans are not going to leave you bankrupt, for instance. And that's essentially the role that this new independent state board will play. Other states may choose to do this very differently. Some states may choose to have no insurance exchange at all, in which case the federal government will either set it up itself, or they'll contract with a nonprofit entity to do that. Or other states like Iowa are taking a completely different direction. They're essentially just saying, here's a phone book of plans with no judgment on our side about what's right or what's wrong or what's good or what's bad. So California is really seen as having staked taken a pretty aggressive stance in terms of how they're going to regulate this exchange.
Is the hope that through the information there will be competition and the escalation in rates would slow down?
That is the hope. And so, of course, that's what I asked all of the health insurers that I talked to. And, there are some insurers that you might expect are very much opposed to this. Anthem Blue Cross, which is they provide the most individual health insurance plans in California. They've been very much opposed to health reform. They say that this will end up in reduced competition, well, not reduced competition rather, but limited choice for consumers, because inevitably it will limit choice somewhat. There are other plans like Kaiser and Blue Shield that actually very much support this, and I was talking to somebody from Blue Shield, and they actually were kind of excited by this idea that one of the rules in this new exchange would be that insurers would actually have to disclose how much they pay for the medical care that you receive. So how much are they paying hospitals? How much are they paying drug companies and device companies and imaging centers and so on and so forth. So a lot of that information up till now has been very much close to the chest. They've, in some cases, been required under confidentiality agreements by hospitals not to share that information. So I think the insurers are feeling, some of them at least, are feeling like, hey, look, we really got beat up over the last couple of years, and we want the chance to show you why these premiums are increasing.
We mentioned Anthem, and this week also there were rate increases granted to Anthem as one company. Tell us about that, because that was part of the whole center discussion when the health care bill was first passed.
Exactly.
in
So you remember
Washington.
that even President Obama called out these proposed rate increases in California when Anthem said we're going to raise rates for up to 39% for some 800,000 individual customers in California. The state insurance commissioner then called for an independent audit, and that independent auditor found there were some math errors essentially in their rate proposal. So they pulled that. There were also math errors in some other insurers, by the way. So now Anthem, as well as Blue Shield of California, which is a nonprofit carrier, they resubmitted their rate plans, and the insurance commissioner approved them this week. Anthem rates will go up about 14% on average, and the Blue Shield rates will go up about 19%. And essentially, the state has, as of now, there's no state law that gives the insurance commissioner any authority to block rate increases. And as long as the insurers can demonstrate that they're spending 70% of your premium dollars on medical care. That's the only tool they have essentially in their tool chest.
Well, we've talked about what's being offered to people who need health care and insurance, and the decisions are being made by politicians. So we're going to turn to Carla now, where there's a whole new crop of them hoping to be in Sacramento to make some of these decisions come
That's right.
November.
And Californians have seen the governor's race and the Senate race played out over the last couple of months in kind of a lopsided fashion because there were some primary contests, but now we're heading into the general election. We're finally seeing things ramping up on both sides. We saw Attorney General Jerry Brown in Santa Rosa this week before about 800 very enthusiastic people. He's got his campaign sort of up and running after having spent hardly any money. The unions are helping him out, no doubt about it. But Meg Whitman, of course, has about $105 million of her own money into this game so far. Both of them are starting to go at it, and on the Senate contest as well. We've seen Carly Fiorina, the Republican, and Barbara Boxer in a head-to-head battle. Both of them are very, very close, and this is going to be, for the next 2 months, the battle that the country is going to be watching. Fiorina and Boxer going to be debating for the first time this week in a debate co-sponsored by both the Chronicle and KQED and Channel 2. And I think that's going to be a really a nationally watched contest. The Republicans, we talked to Mike Murphy, who's the strategist for Meg Whitman today, says the Republicans are really motivated because they say they have the most diverse group of candidates that they've had in a long time in California. They've got a Latino, Abel Maldonado, and Lieutenant Governor Damon Dunn, African-American, for Secretary of State. Whitman, 2 women, and Fiorina at the top. So the Democrats have got to challenge this also, and Brown has had a very low-key campaign, has hardly spent any money. So this is all going to be about, is it this anti-incumbent fever? We've seen these sort of midterm elections and primaries all over the country. A lot of talk about Tea Party fever and anti-incumbent fever. The question is that going to play in California? The jobs and the economy still a big issue. Just coming off the Republican convention, as we did in San Diego last week, Republicans are saying they are ready. They've got the money now, and Whitman is throwing a lot of money into the Republican Party here more than ever before. So this is going to be very interesting going forward.
And I'm curious with Jerry Brown. He's somebody who's really grown up in front of all of us, and you've been covering politics for many, many years.
Right.
I'm curious if you find yourself learning anything new about him, or do we already know everything there is to know about Jerry Brown?
I don't think we do. Brown's argument this week in Santa Rosa was this: look, I've done this. I've been here. And I know the players. There are plans. Meg Whitman has a lot of plans, he said. But plans are one thing, but you've got to be able to deliver people the good news and the bad news. He said, I can work with the unions and the enemies of the unions and bring them together. That's got to be his rationale, because Whitman on the other side is saying, look, Jerry Brown, 40 years in politics, a failed politician, and really playing to that incumbent thing. Brown's challenge, I think, Sarah, you're absolutely right, is going to be to introduce himself to a lot of voters under 40 who don't know who he is. In Santa Rosa, I think that was the thing I noticed. There weren't a lot of people under 40. He has to introduce himself to
The
those
unions
people.
are talking about something like 1 million more voters and some new
That's
technology.
right.
Well, not that new. But
Yeah, no, I mean,
but new
the
technology that they
unions
think
are
will
out
bring
there,
the-
and also the Democrats are getting help from President Obama. He put out an endorsement letter for Jerry Brown this week. It crashed Brown's website. Boxers appearing in Oakland on Saturday with the Obama campaign people. They're hoping to get help from the national side. But you're absolutely right. The unions were in Sacramento this week protesting Meg Whitman, thousands of them, on Thursday, the anniversary of the 19th Amendment, which gave women the right to vote. Of course, noting that Meg Whitman didn't vote. That's for many years. That's how they're going to come at her. And they are going to use technology and other things. But I have to say, Whitman's campaign they just introduced an app for the iPhone today. Yeah. They have got technology all over the place, more than we've ever seen in California.
And as we move on to education, though, there was a poll that showed very well for Meg Whitman.
That's right. A new Rasmussen poll, which is a Republican-leaning poll, and their campaign admits that. They say it's probably very close, but it shows Meg Whitman up 8 points today over Jerry Brown. I think that should be taken with a note of caution. Even her campaign says that. But the fact is, she's got the money and the message, and she's certainly all over the airwaves, and Jerry Brown now is going to have to match that.
Well, let's turn to the state and its second attempt to share in some federal money to improve education in this state, and second time failing.
Right.
So what did we do wrong this time,
Well,
John?
the second time wasn't a charm, that's for sure. But, you know, the state did much better on the second time around in terms of points on a 500-point scale. It raised its points 83 points, which is very good. And the reason it was different was that this was a very different proposal. The districts led it, as opposed to Sacramento, as opposed to the Department of Education and the state school board. So it was 7 superintendents primarily leading fairly visionary superintendents, including Carlos Garcia of San Francisco and Raymond Cortines in Los Angeles Unified. And they came up with actually a very impressive and, I thought, strong proposal, but ultimately fell 17 points short on that 500-point scale, and it was 16th place in the top 10 states, 9 states plus District of Columbia.
So, John, I mean, 16th out of 19th, and one of the things they pointed to was the data system in California.
Yes.
Here we are, the home of Silicon Valley. How does that happen? How embarrassing is that? And is there something that can be done about that to put us in the running for the next time around?
Right. Well, you're not the first person to ask that question. It's been asked for the last, I think, 15 years or so. And we are the home of Silicon Valley, and we're also the home of Sacramento. So I don't know whether one cancels
the other one out, right?
Right. I think the state has had real difficulties in managing computer systems, and this was a complex computer system in which 1,000 districts are supposed to feed their data into one computer system, and it's had a lot of trouble. So other states are far ahead of California in using what they call a student longitudinal data system, and so California lost 14 points alone on that factor.
To what extent was it not possible to win this without union support?
Yeah, it's really difficult. It's difficult for 2 grounds. Number one, they look at the participation of unions as a reflection of all the elements in your educational community, superintendent, school board, and unions. Only about 1/3 of the unions participated in it. So can you win it? It's difficult, but if there's a third round, and if some of the unions that are now discussing in Los Angeles the use of really performance factors of performance with teacher evaluations are actually discussing this now. If they resolve some of these issues, and the unions can sign on, I would think if there's a third round, California might do quite well.
What else did we learn from just going through the process? I mean, what else do we have to do to get in the running like the winning systems back east?
Right. Well, I don't think you're going to fix your data system in a year. In fact, you won't. I think that the entire race to the top is interesting, and you know, it's a competitive spirit among states to do it, but there's some very serious things. It gave states cover to do some serious reforms, including look at how teachers are evaluated, look at the equity of placement of teachers in schools. You know, these are important things that districts wouldn't do on their own, and this was an incentive to do it.
But is it really fair to compare California, a state this big, this complex, with this many diverse problems, with other states, put it up against a Delaware or whatever, And is anything going to change as we go forward that's going to change the way we come out of this process?
Well, New York, Florida, Ohio, some significant urban states also were winners. So it's not just the diversity of a student body. I think in Sacramento, it's hard, as we learned in the first round, it's impossible to get all the districts to participate. And so this was to say, let's have 7 districts that are committed to the reforms that the Obama administration identified, and have them lead it. As a matter of fact, 1/3 of the kids who are low income and minorities are within those districts. And California has 6 million students. So we're talking about 2 million students alone among these districts that are participating. That's larger than most states.
And so we're talking about a pot of money that's $700
Yes.
billion dollars
Right.
that we're trying to get a bit of.
700 million.
Where did we do well?
In terms of the application?
Yes.
Well, California adopted the Common Core standards, which it committed. That helped. It has a very strong charter school law, and the matrix, the Obama administration, that ranks highly. California has strong assessment system. And it also adopted, in terms of turning low-performing schools around, the models that the Obama administration encouraged. So all of those areas it did quite well.
So there's one more chance.
Maybe
Thanks.
so.
Thanks very much, John. And thanks to all of you for joining us tonight.
Thank you.